Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Steve.
I'm not sure if I need this. I come from Humberside, so you might be able to hear me anyway. But we'll give it a go. Just following on from what Jules said about what the theme is for this year, I can tell you, if you want to love your wife, your friends, your neighbours, your children, your grandchildren, have a heart attack. It's easy. You want to lose weight? Have a heart attack. It's easy. You want to enjoy the food that they get put in front of you? Have a heart attack. It's easy. Because you get a completely different perspective. I've spent a good part of my life abusing my body and trying to manipulate my relationship with God. I mean, if I look at these people here today, maybe you're a lot like me. I've always been looking for a little miracle with God in my faith. You know, can I not just see somebody walk on water? Can I not just see this happen? And I had to do it in blind faith. And it's always been a challenge for me. I'm probably getting a little bit off the track here because I spent a lot of time this last 2 or 3 months preparing some notes. And my wife, Alison, has helped me with this. And there's been a lot of people who have had an input into it. One of my passions in life is sailing. I love to sail. When I'm on the water, sailing my boat, I'm at peace. I don't care about anything else. I just chill out. And it all falls into place for me. You know, my cosmos comes into place. My grandchildren have got close to doing that for me, but when I'm on the water, that's my passion. And on the 29th of September last, I was enjoying my passion. I was pulling my boat out of the water to clean it up. And I had a massive heart attack. And I was even selfish that day. I pulled the boat out of the water with my son-in-law, Ben. And when we got out of the water and it's in its cradle, I told him it could go. I was going to enjoy this moment now on my own. A lot of other people. I was meant to be helping other people pull their boats out, so in between pulling their boats out and working on mine and wanting to get the hose pipe first and get the brush first, I had a heart attack. And it was very painful. And it was agonizing. And in that moment, I died. And I got to go somewhere quite bad. It was dark. It was cold. It was very scary. And I was very afraid. And God wasn't there for a moment. Just for a moment. And then I came to. And there was people running around. I had my heart attack with lots of people around. And they were all busy trying to do what they could. And then finally, you know, the professionals arrived. And if you've ever seen the TV series, the professionals, they didn't turn up in a Ford Capri. And they turned up in a St. John's ambulance, and I was so pleased to see them. And then they started to work on it. Now, up until recently, I didn't understand why God was giving me another chance. I certainly didn't deserve it. You know, if this was my time, I didn't want to go. I wasn't ready. And certainly my relationship with God was not in a good place. But, you know, they brought me back. They got me in the ambulance, and off we went. And that day wasn't just a simple heart attack, and it was over and done with. God had something to do with me. We'd only been in the ambulance a little while, and all of a sudden the ambulance pulled over, and my daughter, my youngest daughter, had flagged it down. The message had got out through the Blakey tom-tom tree. And she came in, and she saw me in the state I was. And for all of you men here, you know, we have this inbuilt thing to want to protect our families, our wife, our children. And I wasn't doing this. I saw on my daughter's face some terrible pain as she watched me die. And my wife and my eldest daughter and my grandchildren got to see that as the door went on. I felt very ashamed. I felt ashamed that as a grown man, I couldn't control my desires. And for me, part of that was, the way that I ate, the way that I lived my life, my lifestyle. It certainly wasn't good. And I was now paying the consequences for it. So we got going a bit further, and we'd only been going another 5 minutes, and the ambulance pulled over the side of the road. We had to have a special paramedic to give me some IV medication, some morphine, because the pain was just agonising, and to help further stabilise me at the side of the road. When they did that, we continued, and we got to Middlemore. And I thought, I'm in a hospital now, but I'll do the right thing. And they did all the blood tests, and we went through that process, and then they did more blood tests, and then they came back and said, you've had a massive heart attack. It's like, well, that's a surprise. It's not. They said, however, we've done some more tests, and you've got some severe clots forming in your heart. You've got clots in your arteries, and you've got clots in the chambers of your heart. And we have to do something about this now. And one of the things to do is angioplasty, to get some stents in, to get some blood flow to my heart. They said, but unfortunately, angioplasty at Middlemore is closed for the weekend. It closes at 4 o'clock on the Friday, and it opens again on Monday at 8. I said, oh, bugger. What are we going to do now? And it says, well, we're going to have to transfer you to Auckland Hospital. We're going to have to transfer you across town. But we need you to sign this particular form because it's very serious in moving people like this. And I said, well, how serious? And he said, well, you just fill this form. And at that particular point, another senior doctor came through. He was dressed in black. He had a black hat on, flashy uniform. I mean, it felt quite ominous. Gosh, just a grim reaper. And he said, I need you to sign this. And the only words that stood out was, death is imminent. And they said, you've got to go in this ambulance. We're going to take you straight across to theatre. And you need to know that a lot of people don't survive this trip in your condition. So I started praying again. And we got across Auckland in 12 minutes. In a Saturday lunchtime. Maybe even been quicker. And it's very scary. Alison was in the ambulance with me, and we were praying. And God was listening. And we got to the hospital, and they took me into theatre. I'm just going to stop it there before I tell you what happened next. Because you've got to understand how I got to this point. And how I've tried to manipulate God. And why should he bother to help somebody like me? Or any of us. And some years ago, I'm sorry Sarah, but 38 years ago, when Sarah was born, I wasn't there. I was doing something else. My wife was in hospital. She was only 7 months pregnant. And I turned up to visit her at 7 o'clock that evening to find her bed empty. And that she'd had a little girl, my Sarah. And I went to see her, but my wife wasn't terribly well. She'd had an emergency cesarean, and she wasn't in good shape. And I stayed, and then later that night I went home. And then I got a phone call just on midnight in the winter to say my wife was dying, and it was time for me to come back and say goodbye. So as you can imagine, I prayed to God. I prayed with everything I had. I promised God anything. I would do anything. I'd give him anything if he could just save my Ali. And I got to the hospital, and when I got there was snow, it was a blizzard. She was plugged in, she looked awful. So I went down to see my little girl, who had been born just a few hours ago, and she only weighed 4 pounds 13. And I just held her hand, her through the little incubator thing, and I stayed there praying with God, to fulfill a promise. And I went back up to see Alison in the early hours of the morning, and there she was, sat in bed, drinking a cup of tea. A miracle in my life. And I thank God for that. There was a time for me to change my life. Right there and then. And did I? No, I didn't. I put that aside to my shame, and I moved on. And I kept on being a bad boy. I was a child after the Second World War in the 60s. You know, we had an expression. If you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. Drugs, sex and rock and roll were nothing for me. I was way beyond that. And I'm not here to talk about the bad things I've done with my life. They're between God and I. And He's forgiven me for those. The issue is, if I'm ready to forgive myself. And that's the challenge that God's sorting out for me. But it's in good hands now. So we moved on, and I ignored him. Well, 18 months later, my next child was born. Alison and Sarah were only 9 months old when she got pregnant again. And here we were in hospital. And she was dying again. And my little girl Amy's heart was failing. And I went outside and I collapsed outside the theatre, outside of the delivery suite. And I cried to God. And this time I had a vision. God didn't just fulfill the promise. I clearly remember this car coming along as I laid there on the floor, all rolled up, and the door opened and a voice said, "It's time to get in here with me." And I remember distinctively saying, "You save my wife and daughter, and I'll do anything you want." The next thing I heard was a nurse telling me to stand up, get a grip. Your wife and your little girl want to see you. And I went through there and there was Amy. And I was so pleased to see them. I had 2 daughters. And my wife was doing fine. And I thanked God. Guess what I did then? Did anybody guess? I moved on. I got what I wanted out of God. To my shame. If I look at all the things I've done wrong in my life, lying to God, I'm going to have to answer for that. Just to see my heart. So we moved on. And then I had my heart attack. And here I am going into this suite to be worked on. And there was another miracle. There was a young woman there, Stacey, who I'd known since I was 8. She's part of my family. She was 8. Sorry, thank you. And she was there, and she said, "Do you want me in this room with you?" She'd been called in with all these other doctors that had been called in that day because they weren't on duty. And I said, "Absolutely. If I can have somebody there that knows me, to hold my hand." Just a simple holding of the hand. Yes. So they took me in there, and they proceeded to do what they did. And then it went wrong again. And I died. I remember at the time looking at them. She was holding my hand and they were working on me. And the next thing I remember, the room went very bright. And as much as I'm looking at you now, I was looking at myself on the table. And they were frantic. They were doing all sorts. And the room got very bright, got very warm. I felt at peace. I actually felt quite good. I thought, oh, this isn't too bad. It's better than what happened earlier. I remember distinctly thinking that. And where I was, laid on the table, got smaller and smaller and smaller. And there was just me left. And they were still running around like little bees around me. And I felt at peace. I felt I was in God's presence. Whether it be the Holy Ghost, Christ, God, the angels, didn't really matter. I was happy to be where I was. And then something happened. And instantly I was back on the table. And they just jabbed a 30-degree syringe of atropine into my heart. And that certainly does the job, I can tell you. And there I was. And they were bringing me back. And then they took me to a room. And then some time later, the doctors and nurses came to see me to say, it's not good news. 3 of your arteries are 90% blocked. And when we tried to open them up, things got worse and your heart stopped. So you're going to have open heart surgery. And we're going to have to do this. But we had to make a call there and then. We've got the super thinners we can give you. And if we do that, it means any chance of opening you up is gone. Because if we cut you up, you're going to bleed out. Because your blood's so thin. But we've already made that decision for you. So for the next 5 days, you're going to have to be a good boy. You're going to have to not move. And you're going to have to do as you're told. And as soon as your blood levels have come right, you're coming straight back in here. So they moved me back to Middlemore. This time it took 45 minutes. And they didn't want me bouncing about in an ambulance, so I got there. My son-in-law, Ben, summed it up. His comments to my family was, it's a good place to be for Steve for 5 days. Maybe he'll get his act together. And Ben isn't necessarily a committed Christian. He believes in God. And I think he was thinking it was time for me to get a few things in perspective. Out of the mouth of babes came to mind. Because he was right. I spent 5 days in hospital, reflecting on my life, still asking God why. Why me? Do you know something? It's very simple. It really is. It isn't complicated at all. I remember in the early hours of one night asking God why. And he said to me, how much do you love your wife? How much do you love your children? How much do you love your grandchildren? Because I love you more. And I know how much I love my wife and my children. And he loves me more than that. Wow. So God was going to do anything. If I asked with an open heart. There was no more lies to me. There was no more deceit. That had all passed. Down to the truth. So God gave me a very simple answer. It's because he loved me. Me. Oh wow. You know, very humbling. And I confessed with God about all of these chances that I'd missed. That I could have saved all this pain through life. And how I struggled in taking communion at various churches because I felt like a hypocrite. And I didn't like getting emotional. And when I got close to God, I got emotional and I wasn't having a bar of that coming from the side. Blokes don't cry. So I wouldn't draw close to God. And he said, really? That's your hypocrisy, is it? Yes. He said, well, let me tell you something. He said there was somebody called Peter. He loved my son. He worshipped my son. And when he was asked to stand up for my son, he denounced him. He did it 3 times. He said, and yet he went on to do great works for my son, for me. So he then turned around and God said to me, he said, so, what's your hypocrisy again? What's so disqualifying for it? I said, well, nothing really in comparison to that. He said, right, pull yourself together, move on. I've forgiven you. You wanted my forgiveness? You've been given. Do not diminish the sacrifice that Jesus made for you by this self-pity pride that you're wallowing in for the last 40 years. You know, effectively, there's my father. He just saved my life. He explained the great mystery to me. He was giving me a clip around the ear at the same time. So during that week, I got to understand my Father. My Father in heaven is just that. He's an all-loving Father. And there's nothing you can do that he won't forgive if you're sincere. And there's nothing he won't help you with. All you've got to do is ask and believe. Sometimes you don't quite get the answer you want, but it's there. And if you're looking for a miracle about does God exist, I can tell you he does. You don't need to go through that heart attack I've just been telling you about. I'm going to save you all the pain. God exists. I have been in his presence. It was a painful experience to have, I can tell you. And I've got this every morning of my life. When I wake up and I look in the mirror to remind me of my shortcomings and how fortunate I am. I've got a lovely wife. I've got great daughters. Beautiful grandchildren. I've got great friends. People like you who have prayed for me, who have interceded on my behalf with God. And now I know why God has saved me. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. I still had the surgery to go through. But they were going to open me up. And here I am after all of those experiences with God, not living in faith anymore like I should be, but actually spending some time with my wife and children to say goodbye. Just in case it all went pear-shaped. And off we went. And they got me into theatre. And there I was, laid on the table. And a bit nervous, and it was time to get me off one bed and onto another. And I said, oh, for goodness sake, I'll do it myself. They forgot to give me the pre-meds. So I was wide awake. I was chirping as anything. And I laid on the bed, and the surgeon came through. Frightfully posh Indian gentleman, alone. He was going to do the heart surgery, and the crazy Russian, Andrea, he was going to cut open my leg to get the veins out to replace my arteries. And he saw me climbing off the cart and climbing onto the theatre. And he said, what's this man doing? He's not had his pre-meds. So I said, well, you better get on with it. And he said, well, don't worry, I'm sorry I didn't do it earlier. He said, but I've got my hand in now. And I thought, oh, gee whiz. And they gave me the happy juice. And as you can see, the operation was a wonderful success. And the doctors and the nurses have been amazed at my recovery. When I came out of hospital, I was like an old man again. It was one step at a time just to go down the stairs, let alone get up. I had to get on my bum to get up the stairs. Now I'm up the stairs like a 25-year-old, two at a time. And I've got my driver's license back. So all of you 15 and 16 and 17, 18, it's great, isn't it, having a driver's license? I just go for a drive. Hey, this is great. I really enjoy the small things. I cry a lot. Well, I'm told I'll get over that when I'm on my own and I think about the miracles I had that day. And I had several. And certainly since then, I've been seeing the doctors and the nurses for my post-recovery, and I got to meet them a while back. And they asked about things, and I gave them my testimony. And I witnessed to everybody I get a chance to. They see the scan. What's that? So I had to cut myself shaving. Thank you very much. I said I had open heart surgery. Why? Oh, I don't know. Have a wild guess. Maybe it was a heart attack. I said, oh gosh, Steve, how'd you get through that? I didn't. God got me through it. Just God. He had the doctors in the right places, the nurses in the right places, everybody. When I last met the doctors and the nurses and I told them this story, they said, that's interesting. They said, how long were you out for? How long were you watching what was going on? And I said, oh, it's all over pretty quick. You seem to have it under control. You're running around like, bee around the honeypot. I said, I know, 20, 30 seconds. They said, well, we'd call time on you. We'd started the clock. And if in 4 or 5 minutes you hadn't sorted it out, we were going to just let you go. And tell your wife, he's gone. And I said, oh. And it seemed like 20, 30 seconds. And they said, you were dead for 6.5 minutes. So I said, gosh, for 6.5 minutes we were running around like 1-hour paper hangers. And he said, and then eventually we stuck that needle in your heart and it brought you back. So that wasn't the drugs. I didn't get on the ketamine, which is what they put you on when you come out of the theatre, which apparently I've discovered vets used to put horses to sleep. They're giving it to me. Because morphine suppresses the breathing. And when you're on a bypass machine, your heart stopped. Your lungs are collapsed. Nothing's working, they're just moving the blood around with the oxygen. So they give you that drug then. So when I was on the table in that lab, prior to that, I wasn't on any of those drugs, just some pain relief. And that's what happened to me. And I know it's real. And when the doctors and the nurses said, you were gone for 6.5 minutes, your heart was stopped for 6.5 minutes. And it was that last act. So God obviously wanted me to stay here. So I'm sorry, but you're going to be seeing me around for a while. Thank you. That wasn't my wife. So I've got a big debt to God. And I am so happy to be in debt. I really am. You know, I've got a lifetime mortgage now with God. And I'm happy to repay it. So in the past, in the various churches I've been associated with, because of my hypocrisy and because of my emotional state, I've never got close to people. I've never wanted to help people. I wanted to sit in the corner at the back, being left alone. Well, not anymore. There's a pledge already for Matt and Jules. Anyway, anything I can do to help, just ask. I'm not a mind reader. I say this to my wife. Why haven't you got off the settee and given me a hand? Well, I'm not a mind reader. You want me to vacuum? Bring the vacuum cleaner out. Give it to me. Don't plug it in and make a fuss. Just tell me to do that particular job. So anything anybody wants me to do, anything I can do to help, just ask me. I'm more than happy. I mean, God's given me another chance. It took me a while to figure out why. I've managed lots of people in my life. And if any of them had behaved like that with me, I'd have sacked them. And I'd have said, good riddance. And I didn't. I tried to manipulate God. I asked for the ultimate promises from God to save my wife and children. Let alone find me jobs when I'd got sacked and couldn't pay bills and keep a roof over my head. And he did all that. And yet, I let him down. I denounced that responsibility. Not anymore. I give you all permission. If you see me slipping and fibbing about my promises, you clip me on the back of the head. I'll let you do it once. And once I've turned the other cheek, then it's another story. But feel free to give me a push if you think, hey Steve, that's not your promise. So you don't have to go through the pain that I went through. I can tell you that God's real. He loves you all. There must be somebody in this room that you would do anything for. Is that right? Are there people here that you love? No? Yes? Yeah, you do anything for them? Yeah? That's how God feels about you. Regardless of the baggage that you bring. It means nothing to him. And he lives in eternity. I spent just 20 or 30 seconds with him. Apparently it was 6.5 minutes. You know, maybe Einstein was right. So I'm really happy to be here, and I really thank God. There's a lot of scriptures I could stick in with this, but this isn't a sermon. It's just my testimony. And Matt and I will work on that for another time. And this is to talk about the good news, the wonderful grace and love of Christ that all of us can share without the pain. God does exist. He is real. And I enjoy telling people about him. A lot of my friends say, but you, Blakey, we didn't know you were a Christian. I said, well, you know, I wasn't. It was almost like, you know, there's no atheists in the trenches. You know, that was where my faith was. Yeah, well, I believe in God. Why not? I had nothing to lose. But there was no belief in my heart. Well, God's got to see my heart. He now knows the truth. And I know the truth about myself. About my lying. And about my deceit. about my sins. He's taking care of them. We'll move on. There was one piece of music that became relevant to me while I was in hospital. You know, that's the wonderful thing about these smartphones, isn't it? You know, you can plug them in and use them at any time. And I'll leave you with this funny story. While I was in hospital, trying to be a good boy, it was about midnight. I think it was on the Thursday night. It was dark. I was on my own. And the nurses all came rushing through. Pull the curtains back. Mr. Blakey. What? They said, your pulse is 169, your blood pressure is 140 over 120. What the hell's going on? I don't know. They said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just looking at this. And I was watching a 30-minute condensed version of an open heart surgery. And I just got to the part where they're cutting the ribs open with a pair of garden shears. And I'm like, oh. So guess what? They confiscated my phone. So yes, you know, I watched that to see what they were going to do to me. And I was like, oh. But while I was in hospital and feeling sorry for myself, the nurse took me across to see another gentleman called Stephen. He was a young lad. He was just 50. And he had a heart problem, but he needed a new heart. His aorta and his heart walls were about to collapse. He'd been going through tests for 2 or 3 weeks just to see what the issues were, and he couldn't survive without a replacement heart. Otherwise he was going to die. And he told me all this. He said, what's worse, it's congenital, and I've got to tell my 23-year-old son he's got the same problem. He said, so tell me, mate, what's your problem again? And that was a reaffirming of God's message to me about hypocrisy. Peter, get yourself together. There's always somebody worse off than you. Always. There's always tragedies out there that are way behind yours. You know, you've just got to put it with God. There's a lot of mystery there, and as Sherlock Holmes says, there's a lot of mystery afoot. I don't know what the answers are to everything, but I know one thing. God loves me. He loves you. The same way that you love your children. Be assured by that. I've had the miracle. And it's great. It really is. It's great. I'm glad I've come the other side of it. I'm here to tell you about it. So I'd like to leave you with this piece of music, Paul. And there we go. Thank you very much for listening to me.